New digital scan of the Titanic has offered an unprecedented insight into the ship's final moments.
A robotic drone just breached the deepest deck of the Titanic and captured footage that is straight out of a nightmare.
And you can see all the major pieces, and then you zoom in, and you can zoom all the way down to the smallest detail.
Most people realize the ship is falling apart, but the crazy part is that something is living inside the steel. Hands down, this is the most unsettling discovery in the history of ocean wrecks. It is not that simple though, because as soon as the drone spotted movement, the signal began to flicker and fail. Scientists are scrambling to explain what could survive that much pressure, and the answer is truly haunting for everyone involved. Eternal dark abyss. The Atlantic Ocean looks calm on top, but beneath that blue water lies a world that no human can survive. 2.5 miles down, the weight of the water is so heavy that it would crush a car like a soda can. There is no sunlight and the temperature stays near freezing all the time. This is where the Titanic has rested for over 100 years in total darkness. For a long time, people thought the ship was lost forever because the ocean is just too big and deep. Early explorers tried to find the wreck with sonar, but the sea refused to give up its prize for decades. It felt like the ship had just fallen off the face of the earth and vanished into the mud. But here is the catch, because the deep ocean is not empty at all, even if it looks like a desert. The pressure down there is over 6,000 pounds per square inch, which is basically like having an elephant stand on your thumb. Only special machines can go that deep without breaking into pieces. Most people think the Titanic is just a quiet pile of metal, but get this, because the wreck is actually very busy. The black water swallows all light and color, so you can only see what the drone lights show you. It is a place where time seems to stop, but the ocean is always working on the ship. It is not that simple though, because the mud and currents are constantly shifting around the wreck. One day a section of the ship might be visible, and the next it could be buried under fresh sediment. Explorers spent years scanning the floor with basic tools and kept coming up empty-handed. The mystery only grew deeper as every mission failed to find even a single piece of coal or metal. People started to wonder if the ship had been carried away by secret currents, or if it was hidden by something else. The ocean floor is a strange place with mountains and valleys that are bigger than anything on land. So here is the deal, because technology finally caught up with the mystery in the 1980s. Scientists developed cameras that could see through the dark and robots that could handle the crushing weight of the water. Even with these tools, searching for the Titanic was like looking for a needle in a giant dark hayfield. The crew on the research ships had to be patient and wait for any small sign on their screens. Every tiny blip could be a rock or a piece of the ship, and the tension was always high. They knew they were close, but the Atlantic was keeping its secrets as long as it possibly could. What most people do not realize is that the ocean floor is constantly changing because of underwater storms. These storms move the sand and can cover entire parts of the ship in just a few days. The drone had to be careful not to get stuck in the soft mud or hit a jagged piece of metal. This part of the ocean is so far away that it feels like another planet. There are no plants, and most fish cannot live that deep because of the cold and the pressure. It is a lonely place for a shipwreck to spend eternity, but the Titanic was never truly alone. The crazy part is that even in this freezing darkness, life finds a way to exist. Scientists found that the ship was covered in strange orange icicles called rusticles. These are not just rust, but are actually made of billions of tiny bacteria eating the iron. Basically, the Titanic is being eaten by something alive right now, and that is putting it lightly. These bacteria are special because they can survive in a place that would eliminate almost anything else. They are slowly turning the grand ship back into dust, and they never stop working even for a second. Everything changed when the cameras finally spotted the first piece of the hull in 1985. It was a massive moment that proved the ship was still there, waiting in the dark. The footage showed a giant wall of steel rising out of the mud like a ghost. For the first time, humans could see what the wreck actually looked like after 70 years. It was a haunting sight because the ship looked both beautiful and broken at the same time. But the most unsettling part was just beginning as the drones started to look inside the broken decks. But wait until you see the footage that the latest drone found inside the forbidden rooms. History found again. When the first cameras reached the wreck in 1985, the world was shocked by the images. The drone called Argo was floating over the ocean floor when a massive boiler appeared on the screen. It was one of the many boilers that once powered the giant ship through the waves. The crew on the surface started cheering because they knew they had finally found the resting place of the Titanic. Hands down, it was the greatest discovery in the history of underwater exploration. The ship was not in one piece, though, because it had broken apart while sinking to the bottom. The bow and the stern were sitting about 2,000 feet apart on the muddy floor. Between them was a giant field of debris that was full of personal items from the passengers. There were suitcases and plates and even shoes lying in the dark, as if they were waiting for their owners to return. It was a sad and powerful reminder of the tragedy that happened on that cold night in 1912. The drone moved slowly over the wreckage and captured every detail with its bright lights. The metal was covered in those strange rusticles that looked like melting wax. But here is the catch, because the drone footage from that first mission was just the beginning. Scientists realized that the ship was decaying much faster than they expected. The bacteria were eating through the steel and making the structure very weak. Some parts of the deck were already starting to collapse under their own weight. Every time a drone visited the wreck, it looked a little bit different than the year before. It was like watching a slow-motion disaster happen over decades. The ship was slowly becoming part of the ocean floor and vanishing bit by bit. So here is the deal, because the cameras also found things that seemed impossible to find. They saw a chandelier still hanging from the ceiling in one of the rooms. They found unopened bottles of wine and shiny copper pots in the kitchen area. These items had survived the sinking and the crushing pressure of the deep sea. It was as if the ship was trying to hold on to its old life as a luxury liner. The drone footage made people feel like they were traveling back in time to 1912. But the deeper the drones went, the more mysterious things became for the researchers. The crazy part is that the debris field was over 5 miles long, because the ship had spilled its guts while falling. Every piece of coal and every broken dish told a story of the people who were on board. Most people do not realize that the ocean floor is actually very quiet and still. There are no waves down there to move things around, so the artifacts stay exactly where they landed. If a shoe was dropped on the mud 100 years ago, it is likely still in that same spot today. This allowed scientists to map exactly how the ship broke apart during the final moments. Yeah, about that, because the bow section was in much better shape than the stern. The bow had glided down through the water and landed softly in the mud, while the stern had spun around and exploded. This made the front of the ship look like it was still ready to sail across the ocean. The drone could fly right up to the captain's bridge and see the windows where the officers once stood. It was a spooky feeling to look into those dark spaces with a robotic eye. The footage was so clear that you could see the rivets in the steel plates. What most people do not realize is that the ship is also home to deep-sea creatures like rat-tail fish and white crabs. These animals have adapted to live in the total darkness, and they use the wreck as a place to hide. They are not the only things living there, though, because the bacteria are everywhere. The ship is literally crawling with life that survives by eating the very metal it is made of. It is a strange ecosystem that only exists because the Titanic sank in this specific spot. The more they looked, the more they realized the ship was not dead. Something was lurking in the shadows of the lower decks that the cameras were not ready for. Ghost ship entry. By the 1990s, the technology had improved so much that drones could actually go inside the ship. These small robots were called ROVs, and they were connected to the surface by long cables. They were small enough to fit through windows and holes in the hull that humans could never reach. Entering the Titanic was like going into a haunted house at the bottom of the world. The lights from the drone would reflect off the wet walls and create long shadows that seemed to move. For starters, the drone had to be very careful not to get caught on loose wires or falling beams. The grand staircase was one of the first places the drones explored. It was once the most beautiful part of the ship, but now it was just a giant empty hole. The wood had been eaten away by sea worms long ago, leaving only the metal structure behind. The drone drifted down through the levels of the ship like a silent ghost. It passed by the dining rooms where the rich passengers once ate fancy meals. Now those rooms were filled with mud and silt that had settled over the years. It was a very eerie sight to see the empty chairs and tables. But here is the catch. because as the drone went deeper into the ship, the water became very cloudy. Any small movement would stir up the silt and make it impossible to see. The pilots had to be very skilled to navigate through the narrow hallways without hitting anything. They were looking for the engine rooms and the cargo holds to see what was left. What they found were giant pieces of machinery that were still standing in place. The boilers were so big that they looked like underwater mountains in the drone's lights. It was a massive engineering feat that was now just a pile of junk. So here's the deal, because the drones also found private cabins that were still closed. In some of these rooms, the furniture was still arranged as if someone had just stepped out for a minute. There were mirrors on the walls that were still shiny enough to reflect the drone's lights. It was a very unsettling feeling for the people watching the footage on the surface. They felt like they were intruding on a private place that was meant to be left alone. Every room they entered held a new piece of the puzzle about how the ship sank. The crazy part is that some of the rooms were still surprisingly clean. Because the water does not move much inside the ship, the silt does not always cover everything. Drones found suitcases that were still buckled shut, and clothes that were still hanging in closets. Of course, the fabric was very fragile and would fall apart if touched, but it was still there. It showed just how much the ocean can preserve if the conditions are right. These images were shared with the world and made everyone even more fascinated by the Titanic. Basically, the drones were uncovering the ship's final secrets, one room at a time. They found the mail room where thousands of letters were still sitting in sacks. They found the gymnasium with the exercise bikes still bolted to the floor. Every discovery was a headline in the news because people could not get enough of the ghost ship. But the further the drones pushed into the forbidden sections, the more technical problems they started to have. The electronics would glitch, and the cameras would see things that did not make any sense. Yeah, about that, because some pilots reported seeing lights in the distance that should not be there. There are no other light sources at that depth, so it had to be reflections or something else. Some people thought it was bioluminescent fish, but others were not so sure. The atmosphere inside the ship was heavy and felt like it was full of energy. The drones were recording everything, but some of the footage was getting distorted in strange ways. It was almost like the ship did not want its deepest secrets to be recorded by human machines. The drone was about to enter a hallway that had been sealed off for over a century. Forbidden Wreck Section. In the early 2000s, a special mission was launched to explore a section of the ship that had never been seen before. This was a long hallway deep in the bow that was blocked by fallen debris for many years. Engineers used a smaller and faster drone to squeeze through a tiny gap in the wall. The footage it sent back was unlike anything the team had ever seen. The walls in this part of the ship were not covered in rusticles like the rest of the wreck. Instead, they were smooth and dark, as if the water had not touched them in the same way. But here is the catch, because the temperature in this hallway was much colder than the rest of the ocean. The drone's sensors showed a sudden drop that the scientists could not explain. Usually the water at that depth stays at a constant temperature, but this was different. It was like entering a giant freezer inside the ship. As the drone moved forward, the footage began to show strange markings on the walls. They looked like scratches or grooves that did not match the way the ship had collapsed. It looked like something had been trying to get through the metal. So here is the deal, because the drone then found a door that was still standing perfectly straight. Most of the doors in the Titanic had been crushed or twisted by the pressure, but this one was fine. It led into a room that was not on any of the original blueprints of the ship. The team on the surface was confused because they thought they knew every inch of the Titanic. This was a secret room that had been hidden for over 100 years. The drone pushed the door open slowly, and the camera caught something that made everyone freeze. The crazy part is that there was movement in the corner of the room. It was not a fish or a crab because it was too large and moved in a different way. The drone's lights were not strong enough to see exactly what it was, but it looked like a dark mass shifting in the silt. The footage became very grainy, and the signal started to break up as the drone got closer. Everyone in the control room was holding their breath because they knew they were seeing something impossible. There should be nothing alive that large deep inside the ship. What most people do not realize is that the deep ocean still has many creatures that humans have never discovered. Some of these animals might have moved into the wreck because it provides a safe place to hide. But this thing did not look like any known sea creature. It seemed to react to the drone's lights by moving away into the shadows. The footage shows the silt swirling around as if something had just kicked it up. It was a terrifying moment for the researchers who were miles above on the ship. Hands down, this was the most frightening footage ever recorded at the Titanic site. The drone followed the movement, but the hallway seemed to go on forever in the dark. The walls were closing in, and the robot was starting to lose its connection to the surface. The pilot tried to turn the drone around, but it was too late. A sudden surge of water pushed the drone against the wall, and the camera went black for several seconds. When the picture came back, the room was empty and there was no sign of the dark mass. It's not that simple, though, because the drone's audio sensors picked up a low groaning sound. It was not the sound of metal bending under pressure, but something more organic. It sounded like a deep breath or a growl coming from the darkness ahead. The team decided to pull the drone out before it was lost forever. They had seen enough to know that the Titanic was hiding something that was not meant to be found. The footage was immediately sent to a high-level lab for analysis, but the results were never made public. There were more secrets waiting in the passenger cabins that would leave the crew even more shaken. Abandoned stateroom terror. After the strange encounter in the forbidden hallway, the team focused on the upper decks to see if they could find more clues. They sent the drone into a luxury stateroom that had been occupied by a wealthy family in 1912. The room was in surprisingly good condition despite being under 2.5 miles of water. The bed was still there and a wooden wardrobe stood against the wall. But the most chilling part was the pair of boots sitting on the floor right next to the bed. It looked like someone had just taken them off and gone to sleep. But here is the catch, because the drone's camera caught something even more unsettling in the vanity mirror. As the robot moved across the room, a silhouette appeared in the reflection for a split second. It looked like a person standing in the doorway behind the drone. When the pilot turned the drone around, there was nothing there but empty water and shadows. The team replayed the footage dozens of times, and the shape was definitely there. It was not a glitch in the camera, because it had a clear head and shoulders. So here is the deal. Because the room also had a table with a brush and a comb still sitting on it. These items were covered in a thin layer of dust, but were otherwise perfect. The drone moved closer to the wardrobe, and the door slowly creaked open on its own. There was no current in the room to move the door, so it felt like someone was opening it from the inside. The camera peered into the dark closet and saw several dresses still hanging on their hooks. They swayed slightly in the water like ghosts dancing in the dark. The crazy part is that the drone's microphone picked up a faint tapping sound coming from inside the walls. It was a rhythmic sound like someone was knocking on the metal from the other side. This was happening in a part of the ship that was completely surrounded by freezing water and thousands of pounds of pressure. There was no way for a human to be there, and no machine was working in that area. The tapping grew louder as the drone stayed in the room, and the crew on the surface began to feel very uneasy. Basically, the stateroom felt like it was occupied by someone who did not want to leave. Most people realize the Titanic is a grave, but seeing these personal items makes it feel much more real. The drone's lights started to flicker again, just like they did in the forbidden hallway. It felt like the energy of the room was interfering with the robot's electronics. The pilot tried to move the drone toward the window to get out, but the robot wouldn't respond to the controls for a few seconds. It was stuck in the middle of the haunted room. Yeah, about that. Because during those few seconds, the camera caught another movement on the bed. The silt on top of the blankets was being pushed down as if someone was sitting on it. You could see the clear impression of a weight being placed on the mattress in real time. The crew watching the monitors could not believe what they were seeing. It was a physical manifestation of something they could not explain. As soon as the drone regained power, the pilot flew it out of the room as fast as possible. What most people do not realize is that many divers and explorers have reported strange feelings at the Titanic site. Some say they hear voices or feel like they are being watched by thousands of eyes. The wreck is a place of great sadness, and it seems to hold on to the emotions of that night. The footage from the stateroom was the most direct evidence that something strange was happening down there. But the biggest mystery was yet to come when they reviewed the final tapes of the mission. This footage proves the ocean is way more mysterious than we think. If the Titanic is hiding things this scary, what else is down there in the dark? Do you think the ship should be left alone? Or should we keep exploring the forbidden rooms? Tell us below, like this video, and subscribe for more deep-sea mysteries.